Hey everybody, I'm here with Dennis. Hey Dennis, how you doing?
I'm doing well, friend. Just sitting here in lockdown like the rest of everybody else.
I know it's crazy, right? Having to put everybody from working from home, and I mean, we had to put like almost 130 people working from home between different countries, but no issues yet, right?
Yeah,
Um, we're really lucky that we work in an industry where we can work from home, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
I know we're blessed in that respect. All
yeah.
right,
It's a little
so
different. Yeah,
yeah,
it,
yeah,
it's a little different because like I was talking to some people just even yesterday. We had a couple of webinars this week, and it was odd trying to get the webinars to work exactly how they worked a week or two ago. And what we're finding is that so many of us are now working at home that even now when I try to use my mobile device right now, I keep getting all circuits are busy or the internet has gotten slow because everybody else around here is on the same thing. And
absolutely.
unfortunately, I think the same thing's happening. We could talk about this in a second, but it's even happening in email marketing. There's too much email going out right now.
Well, yeah, I was talking to, well, him, John Caldwell, the other day, and I had said to him, I was wondering if there's more email or less email going out right now. I have to believe there's more
Mhm.
for all kinds of reasons, stay-at-home stuff, all that. Not to mention, we're all having problems to a point, whether it's internet or phone connections, or certainly the conference software has issues for sure, right?
Right,
We've
right,
seen that multiple times.
right.
Um, but yeah, I was trying to decide if there actually less marketing email being sent or more, not just email in general, but marketing versus, marketing email compared to before.
There is probably a little bit more, I would say, just to be completely honest, because, what we're seeing, obviously, this kind of reminds me of 2008, right? When the market downturned, I remember, when we had Eloqua, it was still a very strong company on its own. And we worried about it. I remember Eloqua and everyone else said, "Oh my gosh, this market's going to hurt us." And what we found is that, well, companies basically had said, their CFOs had said, "Hey, listen, we're down on money right now, but you as the marketer need to do a whole lot more right now because you need to drive that revenue in as soon as possible." And sure enough, what we had saw just from a company perspective is people started buying marketing automation like crazy.
Yeah.
I think the same thing's happening here because there are a lot of companies that either are both brick and mortar but also online. And if you look at my wife's inbox, she's getting tons and tons and tons of offers. Like, and it's not usually like the typical, like, well, not typical, but people are trying not to be insensitive. Like, hey, it's COVID, and we need to make some money, or we're giving you discounts because it's
Right.
COVID. Use the coupon code COVID.
Right.
But what we're hearing from brands and marketers is say, hey, listen, we understand the problem right now that times are tough right now, and and we're here for you. And as such, we're trying to do the right thing. So if you need help, please, you can buy here and you can get some money off. I mean, even the stores, like, you and I
Yeah.
live in Texas here, so we're under the Tom Thumb, banner.
Right.
But the parent company, which is Albertsons, as you and I saw in the last
Or
week or two, they
Safeway, right? Safeway is
Safeway is the other
right.
one,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but they said, hey, listen, here's how we're going to help you. We're reducing hours, yes, but it's only because we need time to restock. And
Yep.
it was informative, and I knew that I could only go to the store between 7 and 10, I think.
Yeah. That
And
was
then,
useful email, right?
yeah, it was a very useful email. And then it got better. And not that I'm calling you out for age or anything, but then they said, hey, for anybody else that might be more susceptible to this, we're going to allow the early hours for people. And my dad is and my dad, you've met him
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
couple
Yeah.
times, but he's in the 70s, and it's
Right.
like we're going to get an opportunity to come shop safely between the 9 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Those are very informative and things that we need to be hearing. However, and call out other ones. I'm not going to name this one actually. The more major tire company that's in our area, right? I got the email saying, hey, we're here for you, and we're business so that you can repair flats. Well, I kind of was going to happen, but now my mind is not repair flats.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I think so on the agency side for us, what we saw was a big uptick in our clients wanting to pause automations, redo them for this
right,
because, hey, we miss you.
Yeah.
emails that, yeah, well, of course you do, and I can't come because here I am, right? Things like that. Even pausing birthday emails for now because it's just a weird thing, right?
Yeah.
Some clients did that.
Which is
Updating
smart because
stuff.
people are already kind of going, how do I really celebrate? Like the boys turned 19 like a week. How am I going to do that right now? I don't know, you know?
Yeah, yeah, it's strange. But let's get over to the privacy side of things here.
Yeah. Cool.
Privacy and things. So, um, you know, because not everybody who will see this video is going to be an expert in email marketing.
Right.
What are the laws around email marketing? U.S., Canada. Well, U.S. we have California doing its own thing over there.
Right.
We have Canada with Castle, and we have GDPR. California is the
Sure.
CCPA. Yeah, why don't you go
Right.
through a little bit of that?
Yeah, sure. So there are a number of different laws that the email marketing folks should know about, right? And as you already stated, right, one of the more ones is can spam that started in 2003. In 2008, we did an update to that.
And let me just say, canned spam was really created because of porn spam, right? That's where it
It was.
grew from, right?
It grew from, yeah.
Okay,
There were people that were getting that stuff, and so they went after it,
right.
and so so it became that act. Then to our brethren just up north of us in North America, Canada, they had problems. Actually, their issues began where they weren't able to really prosecute any individuals for sending spam in Canada, and so Castle became their law. Actually, then in the UK, the UK has actually had its own set of laws, and I'm not talking GDPR or the original privacy directive, but they had the privacy and electronic communications regulations of 2003. And so there's a lot of different laws that are not privacy based, right? That are email based, that are out there and that dictate the conditions that email marketers must follow. And it's everything from ensuring permission, to put people on your list, to not having misleading headers, to identifying your email as an advertisement, which people still sometimes forget about, including addresses and that sort of thing. So there's been enough of those, and interestingly enough, you and I have been around for a long period. The misuse of data, I think, for a lot of us started
Oh
back
God.
just on, particularly in email address, and that's sort of why we're seeing that. And so, really, it makes it very simple. Almost every law has made it very simple, where it's like, again, tell your email reader where the email is coming from, and be honest about it, right? Who are you? Don't make some craziness. Like I was seeing the typical, "How are you doing? It's been a long time to talk." And you open it, and it's some sleazy sales guy to sell
Right.
you a card warranty, or
Yeah,
some
or the RE, right? The RE that isn't
right,
an RE, right? The reply
right,
that's not a reply, right?
right, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
So
there's some definite strange stuff. So a real quick question, because you had said you mentioned UK and Europe.
yeah,
So just for the folks out there, GDPR was that a whole Europe thing? Was it who did that cover, right? So
right. So if you look at
or an
historically,
EU group, right? I don't know what the
right.
deal is here, right?
Well, if you look at sort of historically, the EU was never the EU all the time. The EU, right? It was always a separate set of different countries, and then what they decided to do was combine forces, if you will, right? Economies and other things too, and basically got rid of borders, if you will. We call it the chagrin, right? Just like the U.S. is, right? You and I can get in our car today and drive to Oklahoma or Louisiana, and we have a federal, state, and if you will, and we have our own sort of things that happen within the
Right.
state of
And we
Texas.
don't need passports. We don't need identification. We can drive from one end of the country to the other, go through a bunch of
Exactly.
states with no issues.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And the EU decided to form, the EU. Now, back in I'll start in the 70s, an example, like the United Kingdom had its own privacy laws, right? The 1973, 74, 75, they had their own versions of their privacy laws, and so did the other countries. But of course, when the EU came together, part of that was to make things easier, right? And to get rid of those, virtual lines in some cases. And so, for the European Union, when the internet really became even more popular, in the mid 90s, they came out with what's called the EU directive, or the EU, or the directive of 1995, which was the first sort of attempt to, not even attempt, but to get a directive, if you would, said, okay, electronic forms of information now are out there, and we need to put a little bit of understanding and rules around that. And that was the EU itself doing that, right? Everyone kind of came together, and again, each country also had their own rules that could go even further than that. And we'll use Germany. We know that Germany has, historically had bad things happen, and they don't want to ever see the misuse of data ever end, because it didn't go very well in World War II. But now what we have to see then is, with 95 and up until 2008, 2010, well, the internet even changed more. Right. For you and I in the mid 90s, again, it was the misuse of email and misuse of data. But again, you start bringing in social media, you start bringing in these mobile devices and all these little gadgets that you and I have.
Yep.
Well, they wanted to upgrade, if you will, in a sense, and to address those other new technologies, because we're moving at such a pace right now, that GDPR, again, and to answer your question again, was done by the European Union itself. All 28 members at the time. It's now 20 because of Brexit, but they all wanted to make sure they protect the rights of their citizens.
So does that mean that the UK is no longer under GDPR?
That's a good question, actually, and that's one that I get a lot of, confusion. The way that I tell people right now is, in Brexit, there is, 65,000 steps to have to go. We're somewhere around 2,000, right? What we saw recently was just basically an agreement, an early agreement to begin Brexit in the process, and they agreed on certain terms, right? And it's everything from our border's still open, or how to deal with the economy and things like that.
And employment of people over borders and all, right?
Exactly. And so what now has to happen is they will continue those other steps, and the steps somewhere down the road will be, do we stay under the GDPR, or do we want to do our own law? And right now, the way the agreement is set is they're currently still under GDPR. So that's good. It makes it much easier. They have already begun discussions at looking at upgrading their own. Again, most countries have their own laws to make more specific or even more stringent, things happen. But they're already looking at that now. So it is possible that at some point we decide we don't want to have anything to do with the protection authorities in the EU, or vice versa. The EU could basically, say, we don't deal with you anymore. Go off and do your own thing. It could be possible that you may consider that. And what that would mean then is, as you're stating, is the UK would be its own country. That would mean that, virtually moving data from one country like France, which is right next door in a sense, you would have to have an agreement to move data between the French authorities or French locations to the UK.
Right.
The same way you have to do that now. So it cleans things up, but for now, they're still under the GDPR.
Yeah. And they could say, okay, we're not going to be part of GDPR, but we're going to adopt everything in GDPR and put it in ours. I mean, that could be one option, right? I wouldn't be surprised if they do want to separate completely, right?
Well, and if they did that, that also could mean that the UK would generate what we would call adequacy, right? And adequacy would mean the countries, the other 20 members, would recognize the UK as having adequate privacy protections, and as such, free flow of data happen without contracts, the way that we unfortunately have to do it today between the US and the EU.
Right.
And if it helps anybody to not have any heartache about this idea, the European Union, in the last year or so, recognizes Japan. Japan's always had privacy law. For the last couple of years, they've sort of upgraded it to kind of come in line with today's technology, but the EU has decided to recognize Japan. So that makes the free flow of data and the data-driven economies work easier and faster. So if they can do that with Japan, I'm sure that they can figure that out even between the EU and the UK if they had to.
Yep. So what is the difference between, because we hear anti-spam laws and we hear privacy laws, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes people mix them up, I think. So what is the difference there?
Yeah. So people either confuse it all the time in terms of what's happening. In fact, I think people were even confusing them more when GDPR came out, because I think more than half of the U.S. national companies identified GDPR almost 2 years ago as a top priority for them. But there are a lot of differences in terms of what they're doing, and really it's our scope, right? If you look at Antispam, the scope is about any commercial electronic message, right? But then if you go to the next anti-spam law next door, which is Canada, then it's any commercial electronic message, including email, SMS, audio, video, sent through Canada, and it gets even more complicated. Let's say GDPR. GDPR sits similar to CAS, right? But it includes more tougher personal data protection safeguards that have to be built into products and things like that. So when you look at the email laws, right, they're really focusing on the inbox. They're really focusing on emails and commercial messages, whereas the
holding the sender responsible, right?
Hold sender responsible, right? But then you get into Castle and they go off further, email and it's SMS and other communications, including social media. And then you get into GDPR, and it's not just about channel, but it's about the identifier, right? And that's, unfortunately, it's written, I say unfortunately, maybe it's good, it's written so broadly that it could be an email address, social security number, phone number, a nickname, almost anything that could identify an individual, right? And so it also changes too as well, because the consent rules can be, right? For most anti-spam laws in the early days, they were all about opt-out, just the way that we are here in the US. And you and I joke about this all the time, right? When we talk can spam, it's because you can spam,
right? Because it gives you, it's the weakest of them all, right? I mean, come on.
It's the weakest of them all. Yeah, exactly. But then you look at Castle, and of course they move to opt-in, and you can either do verbal or even written opt-ins and not, and they even get into the idea of, like, if you have an implied consent, just how long could that be? And it could be up to 2 years. But then again, with GDPR being a privacy law, it's opt-in, right? It's similar to to Castle, but it extends opt-in rules for the collection, the sharing, the processing of personal data, and also requires you to renew that more often. And again, so as you can tell, it's more than just about the email address anymore. So they do overlap though, right? GDPR, Castle, and Antispam do overlap, right? They talk about defining, impermissible electronic communications like spam. They set standards on permissing communications, which are things like, limits on how many you can send, and requirements for senders to, identify themselves. Don't lie about who you are. That you have to have a clear unsubscribed or opt-out or opt-in mechanism, right? Things like that I think are definitely there, that people kind of go, oh, okay, that makes sense. But really, if you sort of take a look at it, right, each time that you gather these consents and whatnot, if you start applying, I think, at least in my opinion, sort of top dog in all of this, right? Start looking at, GDPR and saying, well, okay, it requires opt-in. If I do this in, I'm going to wholly and just about comply with Castle. I'm going to be going beyond what I'm required to within Antispam. Laura Atkins from Word of the Wise has always said, and has always really harped on, and I love her for this. I hate it when spammers or people back me and say, well, I'm Antispam compliant, so you can't yell at me. Right. You're doing the bare minimum, folks, and you're doing yourself a disjustice here at this point. It's like, come on. You can do better than this.
Well, no, and you know what? In the end, the recipients rule the roost, really, right? So they're going to unsubscribe, they're going to complain, they're going to whatever, right? And which is why those same people call Matt Vernhout to go, hey, why are they blocking me? I'm legal. I'm fine, because I just finished an interview with Matt, right? So, and that was one of the things. Oh yeah, I do. I'm legal. Well, legal doesn't matter much. I mean, don't get me wrong, it matters, but that's not the driver of what people do, right?
Yeah.
So
and that's a good though, because if you think about it, I'm sorry to interrupt you there. If you think about it, we also know that consumers and people, I think you really need to understand this, if you're listening here, that we have a more, informed consumer now, because of all data breaches we've seen, of all the misuse of data. Facebook, Politico is a good example. Sorry, Facebook, but people are now kind of going, ooh, okay, years ago I used to have 16 mailbox or inboxes or email accounts, And then in the last couple of years, they went down to a much lower level, like 2 to 3. And now people are kind of going, oh, I'm going to hold back my information more, or I'm going to segment it out more because I don't trust brands anymore because there's been too much misuse. And yeah, and as Matt said, I mean, yeah, again, if you're just doing the bare minimum, then you're not going to win the trust over of that consumer.
Right. And I know lots of people that have multiple email addresses because they use one to sign up for newsletters or
Mm-hmm.
e-commerce stuff, or, do that type of thing. They have a separate one to do their banking and legal stuff that they don't use anywhere else on the web, right?
Sure.
Um, and I do a little bit of that myself. So
Right.
not unusual. I know you have multiple email addresses because whenever I go to email, you type in dentist, I end up with like 18 freaking options, right? Between the companies and everything else. But so anyway, but yeah, I mean, I think most people have 2 or 3, right? I think that's pretty normal. You have a work personal, a couple of personals. Um, I think everybody in the world has a Gmail address almost, right?
Yeah.
And it's getting
Yeah.
there anyway.
Yeah.
We when I talked to Matt earlier, we were talking about back in the 90s when it really started going, the early 90s, even late 80s, early 90s, Prodigy and then AOL coming in, and that everybody paid for their email back then, if you think about it, right? I mean, Juno was like one of those first companies, right? That was free email,
Right.
the Juno Mail and some of the others that were out there. And then, of course, the big hammer with Gmail came along and said, oh, yeah, a terabyte of storage, and we'll just let you do whatever you want, or whatever they did. I forget what it was exactly. But,
Right.
all right. So I know there's confusion out there with people, and there was even with me in the beginning with CCPA, right? So a lot of people try to equate it to Castle, but it's actually very different from what I understand. That's really more about data. There is more of an opt-out process than an opt-in, like for GDPR, right? Is that right or wrong?
There's not. Sorry, I understand.
So theirs is more about protecting the data, right?
Oh yeah, GDPR. Yes, it is. Yeah, it's
I mean, and CCPA, same thing, sort of, right?
and
It's
also access. Access to the data too. Castle, which is an email law. Now, Canada does have a law, everyone, just so you know, around privacy called PIPEDA, which also extends other data types as well. But really find that many marketers know this, and they just kind of usually focus on Castle. But yeah, but Chris, to your point is that, yeah, I mean, both of them talk about, opt out. Castle talks about it from just the strict totality of opt from getting any more content. Whereas GDPR takes that further, and it's like, yes, I want to opt out, or I want to delete, or I want to even access my data. I think that's where a lot of people are unprepared, is all of a sudden they get somebody who goes, hey, you have my email address. I got something from you. I'd like to know what else you have on me. And if you do that, then, by the way, I'd like for you to delete all my information. Oh my gosh, what do you mean delete your information? What? I've never dealt with that. Antispam doesn't tell me to do that, neither does Castle. Well, like as you said, Chris, it's both GDPR and CCPA, and now the other states are hearing these, are coming up with these, laws that would allow consumers to control any information about them, because we know it's controlled. Data broker are a real pain in the rear. And I just, even this past 3 weeks, I can't tell you, again, just like GDPR on the month before GDPR went into enforcement, I don't know about you, but I forgot how many people had email address. And I was able to unsubscribe from a lot of unknown places like Garmin. Like I haven't had a Garmin PS unit how many years, because my phone does it now, or my watch does it. And that same thing happened this week with COVID. I got all these like reminders, hey, we're here for you. And I'm half of them, I don't even remember giving you my email address. That allowed me, from just even a normal perspective or thought process to their best practice, I should say, to remove myself. Can you imagine those that have the under California or even GDP, they saw that and go, I don't remember giving you my email address. What else do you have on me, and where did you get it from? If you as a brand or a marketer can't answer that question, you're probably going to be in deep trouble.
Yeah. And so it's funny. I requested my information from a company that isn't in California, by the way, right?
Right.
And I asked them for my information with you just to see what would happen. And
Right.
it's one of the lesser known like conference software, let's say that,
Mhm.
sort of, right? And so I asked them to send that to me, and they said, sure, give us 24 hours. And they sent me this Excel file. And when I opened it, it was a Excel file with every single customer of theirs,
Oh,
all their information, credit card numbers, expiration dates, CVV numbers, everything,
wow.
including mine. So I called them
Right.
and I talked to the woman who sent it to me, and she's like laughing. Oh, I'm sorry, I sent you the wrong file. I said, what are you, out of your mind? What is this doing sitting on your computer like this anyway?
Right.
Right? Oh, just send it back. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to send it back through the internet yet again.
You already did anyways, dude. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
So I said, can I talk to a manager? Oh, this is no big deal. I said, no, this is like the biggest deal, right?
Right.
So when I finally got to one of the managers or whoever it was, and he was like, oh my God, right?
Yeah.
And he said, let me take care of this. I'm sorry. Can you delete that thing? I said, so that's my plan. She wanted me to send it back. No, don't send it back. He said, right? Smart, right? And I did, of course, right? But
Right. Right.
I mean, that's the problem, is companies don't understand how to manage their own data, right? I mean, clearly, because you don't do that. You don't build your own spreadsheet of all that information and leave it sitting on the desktop of someone's computer. Holy crap. Anyway,
Yeah.
sorry, that was just a rant real quick.
No, but you're right though, because the problem as well, and this actually would work for our listeners here today, is, you are all data stewards. You're all responsible, not just the chief privacy officers, but you yourself are a part of the team in all of this. And so
Right.
whatever it is that you're building from a marketing perspective, or marketing program, buying list, or collecting email addresses, not, you have to understand to some extent today your job actually includes that being privacy by design, or privacy, knowing what the impact is going to be. And the
Yep.
problem is that we don't do this stuff in college. It keeps us, I don't think, in many places. I mean, the work that some of the coalitions that you and I are part of course, we try to have these classes for folks, but
Yep.
companies just aren't certifying people, and it's kind of scary. I mean, the IPP, which is the organization that basically certifies me in knowing the laws in different countries and whatnot, years ago, when it was just a couple of folks sitting around a kegger, basically, talking, it was a bunch of lawyers, CPOs and whatnot. That organization now is 55,000, almost maybe even 60, I think, maybe now, 1,000 people that are not just lawyers and CPOs, but they're marketing managers and they're IT professionals, and they're these guys from this group. And what we're seeing is people or companies are taking responsibility to say, hey, everybody needs to play a part in it. So if you're hearing stories like this, Chris, and going, yeah, we kind of do the same thing, you probably need to teach those people how to be a privacy professional to some extent.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. So, I don't want to go too long on this. We're going to be coming up on a half an hour. Just don't want to bore
Sure.
people just listening to you and us to gab. Hopefully it's
Yeah,
valuable to them. But
because we can do this for hours.
so this is one good question. So how can a company, whether they're a startup, an existing company, how can they legally build their list? With so many privacy laws, right? And we talked about that a little bit. You have to, I guess, you default to the highest common denominator to go, okay, these have the highest rules. Is this what we use? So do you use
Right.
GDPR? Do you use GDPR and CCPA together? Do they, what do you do, right? How do
Right.
you do that?
Yeah. So people said legal advice, well, there's my blessing or warning or whatever you want to call it. It's really going to sort of depend on a country and what your target to be. I think we're dealing with, and Chris, you and I have talked about it before, we still see that marketers or brands don't necessarily maintain or manage lists by location or where the person lives. Still, and just jaw drop it when I go to fill out a form. All they ask for is my name and my email address, and never the country that I might be in. And I think that's very important as well, because knowing where people are from is going to help you apply the right procedures and stuff. I guess the first thing I would probably tell everybody here is don't buy an email list. I mean, I know Chris completely to this. Don't buy an email list. You can never guarantee, or you will never get a guarantee from those individuals where that data came from or who it belonged to in the past. And you really have recourse as well, because if you end up using that list, can't go back to a data protection authority who might be coming after you for sending spam or breaching a privacy law. You can't go back to them and say, well, it's not my fault. That doesn't work anymore.
Right.
The DPAs or data protection authority basically are holding people accountable for, for the things that they knew about, right? So that's one of the things you have to sort of, be careful with. But, if you are buying the list, right, and you are purchasing that personal data, you're also, again, purchasing that data with people who have not given express consent, right? And so if they're not on there, right, for many places, it would be an immediate violation. But, sorry, you were going to say something?
Nope. No, I was just yawning. Sorry. Not that you're boring. I'm just tired.
Well, it's almost dinner for you and I think it's 4 o'clock, right? Is that how that works with our
Yeah, something like that. Well, and it's strange, I think the whole, and like you said, you went out for a walk. I do that as well. Because when you're at home, you're not doing all the stuff you normally do, right? So I think it actually makes you more tired because you're just not as physically moving around, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But all right, so I think that we can touch on really quickly if you want to, because I don't think people really understand the differences of So what do you consider when it comes to transactional versus marketing or mixed message, right? What happens there?
Yeah, so this is kind of an interesting place because, the differences aren't really not always black and white depending on what it is. If you're located in the US with canned spam, it's obviously pretty common to receive transactional messages with some marketing message as well, and vice versa. The rules from the Trade Commission, or at least the advice a couple of years ago, had been sort of it's up to the perception of the individual, right? And so a lot of us then said, okay, well, fine, then really, if you're going to do messages like this, then marketing in that message should be somewhere at the very bottom, and it should be not a whole lot of content. The 80-20 rule, 70-30 rule, but make sure that low nomination is at the bottom of the message, because when the message is first looked at and perceived, it should be perceived as transactional at one point. It gets a little bit different in other countries, marketing, transactional, and the privacy law things, right? I don't want to bore everybody here, but there are different rules for processing data. And one of those rules is called contractual obligation. So if you have a contractual obligation under GDPR to send somebody information about their bill or something related to the product they bought, then you can send them a message left and right. But if it's not contractually obligated because they never opted in for marketing, then you shouldn't even put marketing messages within that transactional message. It should be separate. Interestingly enough, and I know that Chris here would also agree, we've always said that passive email separation is always going to be best. Chris and I were supposed to be in London over the last couple of weeks, but we spent, unfortunately, a large amount of time canceling hotels and airlines and all. And what we wanted to see in our email was when we got our refunds and were they processing those refunds. Not so much, hey, sad to see you go, or hey, we do have an offer for you in October. Want to return, more interested in what was happening. In fact, even trying to, for flights, we were more interested in transactional message. And those are important because I want those, and I'm not going to mark those as spam, where I'm going to be marketing be more as spam. So yeah, I think that there definitely is that problem that you kind of have to consider it. And it also comes down to laws as well.
Yeah, and I think there are some messages that people, it's funny, sort of the explanation or the validation of why they call something a transactional message. Like I know a lot of people that think cart abandonment is a transactional message when clearly it's a marketing message. There has not been a transaction yet. Right?
Yeah.
I had somebody say to me, a welcome message is transactional. And right, because they said they're trading or paying for the discount with their email address. So there's a transaction happening. I mean, right, this is what goes, right?
Yeah.
And I'm going, stop, right?
Stop. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you can call anything you want, whatever you want, but no,
Right.
okay?
Right.
Transactionals, there's transactional, and then there's system message or account messaging, I call it, where, password resets, that type of thing. Um, if you're on a list and there's a new person posts and you say send them to me, you send those to you, right?
Right.
But yeah, and the marketing, there's benefits to it in transactional for sure. But yeah, you don't go overboard. If you have a little section at the bottom with similar products that people have bought, fine, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think they really
Yeah.
they
Because
get that.
because like you said, like you could it really is a location, because you move to do a mixed message in Canada, then the personal banners would have to be because Castle prohibits that mixture, So
Right.
just people need to think about it. But again, I would, not only because of the privacy and email law, I think just straight purposes of transactional versus marketing versus alerts, and the list goes on. If one gets blocked, the other one won't get blocked with
Right.
some things that had gone. It's just the best
Yep.
anyways. We've been taught for 20 years.
Yeah. So what was I just going to say? I was going to say, when people send I'm trying to think of how the best way to say this. You know what? Maybe I'll worry about this later. I just can't think of the best way to say it. All right. No worries. I think we've covered enough here. I think that'll give people lots to think about. There is lots to learn, and there's all kinds of organizations out there that you can, there are classes on privacy. There's a lot of the email marketing groups have, some of them have classes, some of them have conferences. Go, right? Look, find that stuff that you need. Find the local person who can help you, come in, train you, go through your program.
Yeah.
One of the things, all this stuff is actually forcing people to collect more data, not less, right? Because before you would just connect the email address. Well, that's not enough anymore, right? Now, most ESPs, if you're using their forms and stuff, they'll, collect the IP address and the time, date, stamp, all that stuff. But and even location, but that isn't always perfect because they could be traveling when they subscribed. So you want to collect, U.S., state, country, things like that. Some of that stuff you have to ask for now.
Yeah.
So that you can go, okay, these people in California, I need to treat them differently. These people are in Canada, I need to treat them differently. These people are in the UK or the EU, I need to treat them differently.
Right.
And so I think it forces you actually to collect a little bit more than we normally did back in the day, right?
Yeah.
Well, back in the 90s, it was just the Wild West anyway. But
yeah, it's just an email address before you even had a first name.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it was crazy, right?
Right.
And we could actually send flash and forms in an email, right? Without no problem at all. I mean,
without problem.
Pretty normal. I mean, a form that you could actually submit and collect information on right in an email, right?
Right.
Which is the worst thing. Don't ever do that, by the way. We wouldn't get through in most cases, but never do that.
Right.
Well, I guess there is some stuff with AMP now. You can do a little bit of that, I guess.
A little bit right now.
Yeah.
But more
anyway.
the multimedia experience in an email now versus having to go to the website.
Right. All right. Well, listen, I appreciate you coming on and doing the video with us. You were, again, we had a short list of thought leaders in the industry to go after in the beginning. You were certainly on there. We've been friends a long time. I understand that. You would have done it anyway, probably. But thank you very much.
I wish we could have done it in person. Sorry.
No, I know, right. But that's all right. It's just good. Everybody I've done this with said, "Oh no, it's a nice break, right? And give me something to do for a while," because on some of us, our work has slowed a little bit. Because I don't do day-to-day work as much as I used to, so I have some time to do this. But everybody that I've done it with has been very, very happy about it. Kath Pay was very excited, except she didn't know it was a video thing, so she wanted to clean up behind her, and which is funny. Right? I said I didn't even care. I've got my Red Sox logo back here, and
Yeah, I
And
got my plants over here.
yeah, I have this fork and spoon, right? So
Right, there you go.
and it's Sanchez and Don Quixote.
Okay, yeah.
And my wife hates them, so that's why they're in my office. Anyway, thanks again. I appreciate it.
Oh,
And
I'm glad to be here.
everybody,
No.
thanks for listening. Have a great day. Take
Thanks,
care.
everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.